Hello, everyone. So I'm just waiting for people to join in for a few minutes and then I'll start today's. Okay, so um, I'll let other people join in as and when. For today's class, I'm going to discuss the week 7 content and I'll discuss the assignment for week 6, which we have now, which is now past the submission date. So you can, um, you can review the answers. And if anybody has any questions, um, regarding the content, or regarding the questions in the previous assignments, of course, you can join the live session and ask the questions. That is always true. But it's also possible, like it's also good if you can post a question in the, in the discussion forum. And like, so I know that this is some question somebody has, and I can take that up in the class and explain it maybe in more detail, because it's sort of like, just in the discussion forum, you can only just type an answer basically, and somebody from the content team might do that, but it's just, it would be good if it's also possible for me to answer the questions in a live class. So okay, so we'll get started. For first, I'll start with the week 7 content, and I'll give a review of what is covered in week 7, and then we can discuss uh, the week 6 assignments. Okay, so the normal process I usually adopt for reviewing the content for any any lecture is that I generally go through the questions. Sorry, give me a moment. Okay, so I generally take practice questions which are different from your weekly assignments, and I discuss some of the course material, um, going over these questions and what would be the answer to these questions. So I'll just share this week's practice problems. Great. Right. So the first question for today is, that's the most basic question, which I think Professor Chakraborty discusses over and over again in the the entire lecture, which is that design is kind of important because it stitches together three aspects of any entrepreneur, any product, any kind of innovation, if you want to bring it into the society. And let's see which answer to this might be correct. So, like what Professor Chakraborty does in the lecture is that he gives, like, an overview of different products, and he doesn't just discuss what the products are and what they do and how great they are. He also shows how some very great products, they're amazing, even the users like them, and they kind of work as expected. They are using really good methods, and they've kind of innovated to solve many user problems, but they're not able to somehow be successful. So he's talking about products which are good products. They actually solve the user's problem, but they're not able to be successful. Then he also talks about some products in which a certain part of the entire design problem needs to be solved, right? There's one mobile arm support, and one part of it is just how you're going to fix that mobile arm support to a wheelchair, a person who's you know using any of the many different types of wheelchair designs available in the market. How do you make it like universal, right? Because otherwise you would have to design a different type of mobile arm support for each design of a wheelchair, and that's not feasible. That's also, it's going to increase costs amongst other problems. So they needed like an attachment, um, you know, mechanism, device, whatever, which can function with any kind of a wheelchair, right? And that was one of the other challenges he discusses in the lectures, and he explains the great detail and intricacy with which they try to figure out what combination of screws and what combination of clamps and what combination of the metal block or the sections should be used, so that it can be fixed on all different types of wheelchairs. And they do this after first studying what wheelchairs are actually like, how the product is going to be used, and where ideally it should be fixed on the wheelchair, because you can't fix it just anywhere, right? It needs to go in a part of the wheelchair which actually allows that kind of degree of freedom of movement to the arm once the arm can slide down or slide up. So it kind of requires um, a certain kind of thought. It can't like just be pinned anywhere or something, right? So uh, he's not just talking about mobile arm support itself. He's explained the detailed process through which they figured out how to create just that attachment, just the fixture with which you fix the mobile arm support to the wheelchair. So in that case study, he basically illustrates all the different considerations of design, and for example, like he explains that the fewer parts you have, the better it is, right? And how you can sort of use standardized parts. Then he also talks about how the robustness is very important, because it should not be like, okay, it works on 5 wheelchairs, but the sixth one it kind of fails. Because in these kind of products, like if it fails, the person may actually injure himself or herself, right? So it needs to be very, very robust to different types of designs and to different types of environment, different types of usage, different types of perturbation. So it should not be like, the person is moving the arm and for some reason, if the person accidentally kind of tugs on the arm or something like that, then the thing falls apart. It shouldn't be, so easily collapsible or something. So that is kind of what he's trying to explain. So you see, in all of these examples, he's actually tried to show what design should ideally be doing for all of these products to be successful. So, of course, there is, there's technology, and he shows through so many case studies, so many so many examples how you like good research basically helps you answer all the different questions. So he talks about all these different questions about how is the user going to use it, what materials are available, and what are the you know what are the timelines we need to follow, what other constraints do we have. So research plays a big role in all of this. So in that in that mobile arm support fixture example, that is what he's illustrating, the role of technology and the role of so when we say research, he's actually speaking of research in the context of technology. He's not talking about some intellectual exploration for the sake of itself as research. Research includes that also, but when I'm saying and he's using the word research, he's using it in the context of technological innovation and in the context of understanding, um, having a better understanding of not just the technology and not just the product, but also the users. So he's used the word research there also. So of course, technology is very important. It's an important part of design, and it's an important aspect which is one of the legs of product design. The second aspect is society, and in society he talks about multiple stakeholders, which is one of the questions in this assignment sheet. I'll come to that. But he's talked about all the many stakeholders who matter in the way the product is sold, in the way the product is used, in the way the product kind of is accepted or rejected by the society. So all these stakeholders matter, and he's explained how there is a business, and to a business, it is the profit which decides whether the product is good for them or not. And in the society, like the price of the product is what you pay for the product, but you actually decide whether the product is worthwhile for you or not based on the value proposition. What is the value the product is adding to you? So uh, if your product is not adding any value to the society, it will not be accepted by the society, right? And it needs to address all the stakeholders in the society. And the third aspect is the business aspect. So this is one of the aspects he discusses also in great detail in the lectures. So he's explained that, like, for example, like he talked about this mobile arm support, innovation, which they came up with for people with muscular dystrophy. And he talked about why that product did not work, as in it did not succeed in the market, even though the product itself worked. So the product was good. It helped the patients. It helped, it worked as it should. It was robust. It had, it was sort of um, a new product in that sense that it was just fixed to the wheelchair, and it helped a person actually move their arm easily, right? So the product was fine, but it did not really succeed in the business aspect of things. And the reason for that was that, even if it fails in one odd, scenario for some reason, then the company would get sued. And if the company gets sued, then they have to pay a huge amount of money. And if they want to have to pay, if they think they might have to pay that huge amount of money for even one person filing a lawsuit, then they're not going to put that money from their pocket. So they're going to charge the consumers for that. If they're going to charge the consumers for that, then obviously the price of the product will increase, right? Even though the product itself is a low cost product, but if you have to incorporate the legal costs into the whole business offering, then the price of the product is going to increase. And that would not work for the consumers, because if you increase the price of the product, then it's not affordable anymore. Like these people who are sort of in wheelchairs and have this condition of muscular dystrophy, they have a problem where they can't move that freely. They can't perform normal activities that freely. So just give me a moment, please. So if the price of the product is high, then the people who are sort of limited to their wheelchairs, they would not be able to afford it, because they're not people in full-time jobs or who can't do regular activities as comfortably as well as you and I can. So they kind of struggle, uh, you know, in that aspect of their lives, and they don't have that extra kind of money which they can spend on something like this mobile arm support. So if you see, then even though the product itself is functional and it is a great innovation and it was even low cost. So see, they were even able to achieve a low cost product, which would originally be affordable for these people, right? The great the great emphasis in product innovation was that it was low cost product. But because of this one snag, the insurance thing, they would have to charge a much higher amount, and it would defeat the purpose itself. So because of that, the product remained stagnated for many years, and until the government stepped in and they agreed to pay the amount for that insurance amount, which the company would need to get like a big insurance, which would sort of pay for any kind of legal issues. So they got that funding from the government. So, once the government actually agreed to sort of pay part of the total cost, the product became viable again in the market. So he explains this whole example just to illustrate how a very high tech functional product may sometimes not be successful in the market because there's a mismatch or there's something missing in the business aspect of it. So, in that sense, if I come back to question paper, in that sense, the correct answer would then be business, technology, and society, right? Because that's the right answer for this question. This is All right. So next question is, what is a high risk product as explained by Professor Chakrabarti? So this high risk product is an expression he uses in the first lecture, in the first part of the lecture, where he is explaining this mobile arm support. And he says that it's a high risk product because even if it fails once, it's like the cost is very huge, right? And the repercussions of that are very huge. So it's in a sense, it's a product which we cannot allow to fail, because if it fails even once, they, like I explained, they would have to face a lawsuit, and apart from just the money involved, they would also have to face, like, other problems of products succeeding in the market then going forward. So that kind of a thing is the reason why it became a high risk product. So next question is, who are the stakeholders in the society who need to be considered in the design process? So this question is one I was referring to, that the design process needs to look at the society also, not just the technology and not just the business. So in this part of the discussion, one of the examples which Chakrabarti discusses in the whole lecture is that of the cotton picker by this company called Sickle, right? So I also wanted to sort of just share their website. Take a look. So okay, I'll share that in a moment. But basically, in the cotton picker example, the main challenge they faced were, like, firstly, they had several challenges. They had to innovate quickly enough and innovate and do rapid prototyping all within one harvest season. Otherwise, they would not be able to, you know, otherwise they would not be able to launch the product or create the new product or test the product in time before the harvest season is over. So they would have to wait for the next harvest season to even test a new version of the product. So they had that as one of the challenges, and then of course they had to consider, all the differences in the environment, in the texture, in the texture of the cotton which is being picked, in the humidity, all of that in the air when you're picking the cotton. So all of those factors had to be considered to create that kind of a suction mechanism, which can sort of pick the cotton automatically and fill the bags with it. But they were able to perfect that. So they were able to innovate it. They were able to perfect it, and it wasn't a very expensive product as far as my understanding goes, based on the course content. But the place where it actually failed was that it was not, like, it had not factored in the roles of all the stakeholders in the society. So if you see in that particular product, so this part is not explained in great detail in the video actually, but what he has said in the lecture is that even though the product functions, the benefit of using that product was actually going to the middleman and to the company which sort of sells the cotton, not to the farmer. So even though the farmer was the one who was supposed to pay for the product and use the product, but the benefit of using that product was not really coming to the farmer in any way, in monetary terms, that is, right? So the farmers were not able to use that product to improve their fortune or their income. Whereas the company which was selling the cotton, and the middlemen who sort of, what the dealers, distributors, whatever, they were the ones who actually made more money out of that product being used. So, and this part is not explained in great detail, but this is what he says. So in this example, what he basically illustrates is that if you forget to kind of consider the different stakeholders in the society who are sort of going to play a role in not just how your product is used, for the usage of a product, it is the end user who matters, but in the way the product affects the entire, like the socio-economic ecosystem which it is existing in. So this particular product was launched in a socio-economic ecosystem where the it so happened that the monetary benefits of that product were going to other people. So if I'm buying something, I'm spending on it, I would expect to increase my income based on it. That's Otherwise it's of no use to me. But if somebody else's income increases because of my using it, it does not serve my purpose. That is kind of what happened in this scenario, and this was because like the designers did not realize in time that there are other stakeholders who are going to actually benefit from this particular product. Then if you see in one of the slides, he is given this list of all the stakeholders who should be considered like in the design process. And these are all the stakeholders actually. So the answer for the third question is all of the above. So manufacturers, because they are the ones who are actually, of course, they're the ones who are producing the product. So, if the product is not viable for manufacturing itself, then there's no question of it being a successful product, right? Then, of course, the consumers. Consumers, in our case, we are using the word consumer and end user interchangeably. So, in this particular case, so consumers here are the end users. So, if the consumer is somehow not able to use the product, or if the product does not sort of address the consumer's needs and wants, or at least some of the wants, he's explained this part also, then the product is not going to be, viable to the consumer. And in, for example, in the cotton picker case, the consumers would ideally want that to increase their income by using the product, but that does not happen. So the product kind of fails to address the consumer need in that sense. It addresses the need to pick cotton in a more effective way, that it addresses, but it does not address the other need, which is that the consumers are able to also increase their income from using the product. So that's second stakeholder. Then the distributors. So sometimes it can happen that a product may be very good for the end user, and it kind of helps them also. It's it's great for them, but it may kind of not be liked by the distributors because it kind of hurts their business in some other way. Maybe they have some other competitor competing product or something which they which won't sell if you start using this other product. So, or I'm just thinking out of the top of my head right now, but so there can be instances when the distributors are not happy with some product being launched into the market, and they may just not take on the product at all. Then, of course, the marketers are one of the stakeholders. Like if the marketers are not able to market a product, then it will not reach people, because people need to learn about the availability and features of products. So, if for some reason, if you're not able to market a product, or if the marketers don't kind of have the proper method or proper channels to market a product, then it's not going to work. So there are a lot of times when people innovate a product, it works also, it's low cost, it's great, it it solves a user's problem, but nobody knows it exists, right? So even for people to think about buying your product, they first need to know that it exists. I may have a great need for that product, right? But I may not even know that there is a product in the market which actually solves my need. So how could I possibly buy the product? And that becomes a very big issue. And not all products can survive a slow market. So sometimes some products can also sort of like take some time for the audience to for the target buyers to learn about the product, and you can sort of just stock up your product until the market has warmed up to your product. But some products may not be like that. You cannot stock it up and you can't keep it. It'll get spoiled, or it will just it's not a product which can be stored. So those kind of things are also marketing related problems, that you're not able to push your product to the market quickly enough, and the people are not learning about it quickly enough for you to actually make the business work. Then there are the maintainers. So maintainers are people who kind of just give me. So I was just discussing this week's practice questions, and we can uh, discuss some other problems also. So am I audible to the person who's just joined? Am I audible? Okay, so I'll just continue with where I was. Right. So I had spoken up to the marketers in the stakeholders who kind of matter in the entire process of design. So next we come to the maintainers. Who are the maintainers? So the people who will kind of give you some additional service, or who will repair your product, or who will make it serviced and functioning for the rest of its life. Those people are the maintainers. So for example, like if you're just talking about, say, a bicycle, trying to design a bicycle, so you don't just have to think about the bicycle as it is when the manufacturer sells it to the user, right? Because as the user continues to use the bicycle would need to be repaired and serviced and maintained, and all of that will need to be done. And if a bicycle does not have parts which are easily serviceable, which can easily be maintained, then that will not be a very viable kind of design, right? So somebody is just saying that you are having trouble joining in web. So the best is to, of course, install Zoom and join it through the Zoom app. You can install it on your phone also, if that helps. Otherwise, if you're not able to speak, you can just type in your questions in the chat box and I can answer them. Okay, so the maintainers are important from design perspective also, not just from other analysis perspective. But the design of the product, at the time when you're designing it itself, you should think about the maintainers, not after the product has been sold, or not after the user has started using it, right? So the maintainers are kind of important. Then there are the end of life stakeholders. So the end of life stakeholders are the people who will, figure out a way to kind of uh, how the product can best be upcycled or reused, or how the product should be handled at its end of life. So, for example, if some products have very hazardous materials in them, then that itself is a task, because you can't just dispose of the product anywhere you like, right? So those kind of considerations also need to be taken into account at what the end of life stakeholders, and how is your product going to address them. Then there are the competitors, because competitors decide a whole lot of things, like they decide the market dynamics, to what is, say, a good current price for competing products. Because if there is already a competing product in the market, and if it is a popular product especially, and if it has a reasonable market size, then you have to firstly think about how can you reduce your price um, from what your competitor is offering to the users. And also you need to think about how to penetrate that market, because it's already a market with products um, existing. So Arul, you have joined in the middle actually. So I was just explaining who the stakeholders are in the design process, as Professor Chakrabarty explained in the lecture. Stakeholders are people who kind of who affect your design process, and who would have a say in, not say in that sense, but who you should be considering during your design process. So competitors are important, not because they directly come and tell you how you should go about your design, but they will affect your decisions in the design process, because they are the ones who already have access to the market which you want to access also, or at least a close enough market. And they are the ones who have already sort of set some rules there, like this is the price at which we are selling, these are the features you're offering, and this is the kind of an experience the user gets when they use this product. So when you create a new product, it should be bettering their product on every account, not just on one or two accounts. Your value proposition needs to be a whole lot better than that of your competitors on multiple accounts, if not all. So like it, and especially the price, like unless you're adding a whole lot more value in your product compared with the existing product in the market, chances are that increasing the price of your product compared with that of your competitors is not a good idea. It's not going to work in the long term, because people will not buy a product when there is another product already there at a lower price. So if you have a lot of competitors in that space, you should definitely research your competition, and you should research the products, what technologies they have used, what kind of constraints are they working with, how adaptable their products are, like as in, can they be used universally, or are they meant for just particular specific use cases. So, and also how happy the users are. So for example, there's one part I think a lot of people forget. It's not part of the lecture, but it's just a good thing to know since we're talking about it, that a lot of people forget to see the user feedback on the competitor products. I think that is one of the most important inputs for design, when you're launching a product which already has competition. So if you already know that there are a few competing products in the market, it's always a good idea to see what is the user feedback on the existing products, and study their business model, and what challenges did they face in their business, how did they overcome it, and can you innovate on that also, on the business aspect of it also, not just on the product aspect of it, right? So the product innovation is definitely there, but how can you make your business aspect of the product better, more successful? So if you innovate on the business aspect of your product, what you can do is that you can find a way to say reduce your distribution costs, or to reduce your marketing costs, or some other associated cost, which makes it possible for you to reduce the price of your product, thus making it more affordable for your users and thus making your product more likely to be successful. So all these are just different aspects of design which need to be considered in any design process. So the correct answer for this third question is all of the above. And the fourth question is, why did the cotton picker of Sickle company, why did it fail? So as I was explaining earlier, the cotton picker was designed very meticulously within very tight timelines, and they had to keep innovating the product, to improve its functionality in different environments, in different settings, in different settings. And sorry, is this the final? No, we have another class next week, and then after that, I think there might be a review class for your exam for the course. So that information will be conveyed to you from NPTEL team. As of now, we don't have a schedule or something for it, but the there is anyway another class next week. This is week 7. Next week is week 8. So week 8 class we will have. And yeah. Any other question? It's the same login and ID and passcode for every week. So if every week, if you see the Swayam portal, so if you see the Swayam portal, I don't know if you can see it. Let me just share the Swayam portal. You can join using the same link from mobile also. You don't need anything special for it. Just install Zoom on your mobile and you can join from there. So you can see the Swayam portal, right? In this, if you go to announcements page, there is this information here, link to join class day. There's a live session, blah, blah, blah. Link to join is this. This is the same link every week. So you can just join using this link which they have given here. And if you want to see the recorded sessions, just go to this part, problem solving session recording, and you click here and it will take you to this spreadsheet where I'm updating all the weekly videos, and this folder has all the content, the practice questions which I'm sharing in the class. So you can see all the previous videos. I will be updating some of these videos. There was a technical glitch, so some of them are not complete. So these videos you can see here, and this is all the course content which I have updated. Okay. Yeah, is that fine? Okay, any other question? Okay, if there are any other questions, you can type into the chat box. Yeah, so I think somebody else has joined in. Okay, great. So it's not directing to app. I don't know why, because maybe you don't have the app installed. It directs to the app only if you have the app installed. Do you have the Zoom app installed already? Okay, then I think you just need to check some of your phone settings to see why it is not opening with the Zoom app. I'm not sure why it won't do that. The link is fine. The link is the same link which everybody uses actually for LinkedIn. So the person who's just joined in, am I audible? Is there any specific question you wanted to address? Good evening. You can unmute yourself and speak if you like. So meeting ID and pass, but I just answered this. Okay, no problem if your mic is not working. So the meeting ID and passcode is there in the Swayam portal itself on the home page. Okay, I'll just show it once again. So this is the Swayam portal, right? Can you see the screen? You can just type yes. Are you able to see my screen? Okay, right. And there's another person also. Okay, that was your question. All right. So yeah, on the home page, there is this link. It's the same link which you need to use for logging in every week. There is no change in the link. Okay. All right. So I'll continue with where I was. Right. So for this particular use case, the cotton picker. So like I was explaining, there was, lot of innovation in terms of how the picker would sort of pluck the cotton and it would work in all the different kind of environmental settings, and like when there is too much dew, when it is dry, when it is windy, all of that, and when and how it would get sucked and go into the bag of the backpack kind of a thing which all these people carry, and how the whole thing functions effectively for the farmer. So all of that, it worked. So, the first option would not be correct, that it could not pick cotton effectively, because it was able to pick cotton effectively. That is not the reason why the cotton picker failed actually. So the second is it could not be perfected for mass production. So in if you see in the lecture, he has explained that they had challenges with rapid prototyping and fixing and modifying the product, because the harvesting cycle is very short. That period is very brief. So if they test it in the field and they find some issue, they have to fix it very quickly and create a new prototype, which can again be tested in the field within that short period of harvesting of cotton. Because if it take too long, then you have to wait for the next harvesting season to test the product in the field. So this was a challenge for them, but they managed to actually work it out, and they were able to finally get a product which can be mass produced, which was functional, which worked in all kinds of circumstances. So this option is also not correct. B is not correct. So C is the users did not find the product comfortable to use, and that is again not true, because they kind of worked with all the farmers and observed how they pluck cotton and spend time with them, and then they designed something in some kind of mechanism which would sort of work very effectively for the farmer in the field. So the users did find the product comfortable enough to use, because That is the reason why they even launched the product in the market. If they had felt like the product is not that usable, they would not have launched the product at all. Then the last option is like the product could not survive as a business because it could not pass on the benefits to the farmers. And that is the actual reason why the cotton picker did not succeed, because it was, like I had explained this earlier on, that this product, one of the requirements of the farmer would be that if they are buying a new product, then it helps them increase their income in some way, or it helps them, better their business and increase the revenue or whatever, right? But it was not helping the farmers, but instead it was helping the companies which sell cotton. So which is why the benefit of using the product was not coming to the farmer at all. So, so the value add of the product was not going to the farmer, it was going to companies and to the middlemen. And because of that one snag, the product was not successful. So the correct answer is D, actually, over here. Then the next question is, why does Professor Chakrabarty refer to lecture 21? He talks about this in lecture 21. Just using standardization in the design of the prosthetic limb attachment. So what he is saying in this lecture, I'm not sure if it was in the context of the prosthetic limb attachment or if it was for the mobile arm support. It was for the mobile arm support. I'll fix this is a mistake in the question. It's mobile arm support. Why does he suggest using standardization? So what do you expect in the exam? You have to ask in the question and answer forum, because I'm not setting the exam. So the content team, which which creates the content of the course, have to answer all administrative and logistic questions, because I'm only the TA for the live sessions. So yeah, like I can't answer questions about the exam schedule or exam content or any of those things. So I would suggest that you post your question in the the discussion forum, in the announcements section. Sorry, there is a question. There's a section on Swayam portal that says ask a question, and it takes you to the Google forum. So you can post your question there, and if it does not get answered there, I can try to get an answer for you. But that is where you can ask all course related, as in course related questions. I can answer questions which are sort of conceptual or which you have doubts about or things like that. Because I'm only the live TA instructor. There's a separate content team which sort of creates the whole course and the assignments and all of that. The practice questions I share in the class, I share separately with all of you. This is just for your own practice. And those are all shared in the shared folder. I don't know if you've seen that. I just showed you where to look for it. Okay, so back to assignment. Yeah, so the standardization is, just give me a moment, please. So I didn't understand your question. You said if you are not aware of assignment questions, I can ask those. I didn't understand what you want to say. Sorry. What is your question exactly? I can see the assignments which are shared with you guys. I mean, which you have to fill every week. The Swayam portal is there. I'm sharing separate practice questions because we cannot discuss the current week's assignment in the class. We can't sort of give away the solutions for an assignment in the TA session. So I can only discuss assignments for which the submission date is past. This is, but I can't discuss assignment of week 7, which is still, the date is still left for you to answer the questions. So I can only answer your doubts and stuff so that you know that you understand it better and you can answer it better. Okay. Right. And on. Yeah. Okay. So standardization is what do we mean by standardization? By what he's saying when he says standardization, he means like, there are many um, standard sizes available in the market, which are used universally everywhere. For example, like, the Allen keys, the hex screws and hex keys, they're kind of like a universal thing. There's a standard, half inch, quarter inch, 1/8 inch, 1/16 inch. So they are um, made exactly to specification, right? And there are multiple manufacturers for it, but that specification is very, very precise. And anybody who makes, say, a hex screw or a hex key, they are going to make it exactly to that specification, at least as close as is really possible to make. So this is like, if you use a hex screw, like a screw which is opened with the hex key, for example, then anybody in the world can open it if they have a hex key. And hex key or Allen key is a very, very common hand tool, which most people will have in their mechanical toolbox everywhere. So what he's saying when he says standardization is that if you use these kind of screws or nuts and bolts, then they are very firstly, they are very easy to work with, because easy to maintain also, because like I explained, like there's a problem, it's not difficult to open. You don't need a special tool for opening it, and you don't need to teach somebody how to work with that clamp or with that screw or something like that, right? Whereas if you create some newfangled mechanism of your own, which only you know how it works, then if anybody has to come and repair the apparatus or the fixture at some point of time, then you need to first teach them how it works, right? They won't know how it works. They can't just look at it and understand. Sometimes it's not that obvious. So what he's referring to when he says standardization, he's referring to using some standard parts and standard sizes of those parts, which are sort of universally accepted, universally used. So the first option is that, this is actually there right in the lecture itself, that, when you're producing like 1,000,000 parts, then your quality is going to be way, way better than, say, suppose you are, custom building some part for your particular fixture. Because when you're custom building, you've not perfected the process to the extent where your margin of error is very low. The margin of error may be high, and or it may not be like, very exactly as per spec. It may be, even if it is within spec, it may be just borderline within spec, things like that. Like he gave the example of an O-ring, that there is something happened because of which the O-ring was put to too much friction, subjected to too much friction. And that friction caused overheating of the O-ring, because of which, other processes went all haywire, and that spacecraft basically could not survive. So it was just one O-ring, right? That's what he was explaining it in some other context, but I think it kind of is helpful to understand here, that when you're kind of custom designing, I'm not saying that you should use this in a spacecraft, I'm just saying that in general, in a design process, what he's saying is that when you use these some very customized, some new kind of a mechanism to fix something, your capacity to produce it in exactly as per specification will be very low, right? And in many of these mechanisms, even if there's like a 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter difference in size, the thing, there may be vibration, or there may be movement, or there may be friction. There, it may be like, just not fitting as a snug fit, or it may become loose over a period of time because it's rubbing against, the surfaces are rubbing against each other. So, that 1 millimeter may become 2 millimeter and then 3 millimeter over a period of time. And then, the whole thing might like break because of wrong direction of forces, or too much force on some part, whatever, right? It can break in multiple ways. So which is why, like, having these type of products which are exactly as per specification is very, very important when you're designing something mechanical. So which is why there's the option A, which where it says that when you're producing 1 million parts, you have sort of perfected that process that allows you to like produce say 1 billion of hex keys in 1/4 of an inch size, which are exactly as per the specification, rather than you creating say a 1/5 inch Allen key, which for which you need a new process altogether to make it. And of course, it also increases costs. So option B, standardization. So option A is correct. Option B, standardization, ensures the assembly will function. And this is actually, this may or may not function, may not be true, because depends on what you're trying to do. It's not like I can just put a hex screw everywhere, right? It's not like I can just put a nut bolt of one size everywhere. It may not work. It depends on how the stresses and how the actual functioning is required. So that is not correct. I mean, it may help if that solves the purpose, if it solves the problem, then yes, it will probably help the assembly function better, but it's not like it's always true. So B is not correct. C is standardization requires lesser training for people to work with the parts. So that is true, like I was explaining. If you create a new mechanism of your own, which only you know how it works and nobody else knows how it works, then you have to, from the maintainability point of view for the product, you need to actually train people, especially on how to fix that part, to service it in the future date. And then that also creates some issue from product maintainability point of view, right? Like, a product should be very easily maintainable, and everybody should have easy access to getting their the product service. Like, if you sell it, and say suppose somebody's living in a very big city, maybe they have access to it, but if there's somebody in tier 2, tier 3 cities, they may not be able to get access to that kind of service, because only limited number of people know how that thing functions. Whereas, like, I mean, this is a bit simplistic, but whereas if it is literally just a 1/4 inch Allen key, anybody knows how to open it and fix it, right? So that kind of a thing. So standardization does require lesser training for people to work with the parts in any, in any kind of an assembly. So C is correct. So since B is not correct, all of the above cannot be correct. And A and C are definitely correct. So none of the above is not true, right? So I'll upload the solutions also for the practice questions. I do that like every week, but just letting you know. So just give me one moment. So if you open the folder where I have uploaded the practice questions, You can just check in a few minutes. I'm uploading the solutions as well, so you can refer to that. And I've also uploaded the solutions for week 6 practice questions, which yeah, which I discussed in the class as well. So I'll just discuss one. There's only one more question remaining in this week's practice questions. After that, I will just discuss the week 6 assignment, which is there for you guys on the SWAYAM portal, because the submission date is passed for that, so we can discuss that. So before I continue, do you have any questions from the content, like conceptual questions or anything from any part of week 7 lecture? Okay, so it's not, we'll just continue. So the 6th question is actually based entirely on what he says in the lecture. So this is one important point I wanted to actually mention in the class, that many of these lectures, they're all lectures by different experts who all work in different areas and different fields. They may be doing similar type of things, but they have developed their own workflows and their own systems, which they use in their design process. So, while they may all be, doing same thing in general, broader picture, where we are talking about design, technology, and innovation, which is product design, essentially. The the actual workflow which each expert gives in each lecture would be a little different from the other. So for example, in previous week's lectures, we discussed some other stakeholders, right? In his, innovation cell, what he has created and what workflow they follow. And based on that, there are some stakeholders, things like that. Right now, in this week's lecture, like Professor Chakrabarti has talked about a different thing, different kind of workflow, where he has created a similar type of thing, but a different design process, right? And the people who he has called as stakeholders are different, right? So most of the time, as far as I understand, like in your exam, they will actually refer to which professor's lecture you should be referring to when answering a question, because each one is different. So if, for example, if the question asks, like, as per Professor Chakrabarti, what is the design process? You should explain based on what he has said, not what the lecturer or the professor in some other class has said. So you cannot answer what, say, Professor Gupta has said or what Professor Rao has said in the previous lecture, or something like that. So you have to answer based on what the question is asking you. You cannot come later and say that, oh, I answered this based on this particular professor's content and it should be correct. Because if the question says what, according to Professor Chakrabarti, are the 4 parts of the process of design, you should be answering only on the basis of what Professor Chakrabarti has explained. And each professor has given their own terminology, their own methodology, their own workflow and things like that. And you need to be aware of the differences from one to the other. Okay.
Ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, I have a question here.
Yeah.
Ma'am, since every professor has given their own design process regarding their product design and their own paradigm, but how do we decide when we are designing a product? How do we decide which process should we follow and which process should we go ahead with? because every process has different kinds of steps involved within the steps involved in the uh, process.
Right, that's a good question. So actually, if you see in each week, we are discussing slightly different type of products, right? And they, like for example, like previous week, we were focusing more on med tech, right? Health tech kind of products. In this particular week, we are discussing a lot on how we are kind of implementing, bringing technology and business together. Then in the week before that, Professor Anil Gupta was discussing a completely different aspect of it, which is grassroots innovation, right? So each week is actually addressing a different aspect of design itself. So
Yes, ma'am.
you can kind of think of it as, which you can go through the whole content and then see which category is your product fitting the best. I mean, that would be my recommendation at least. Like, are you designing for social? Are you see in the grassroots innovation lecture, Professor Gupta explains how he has sort of, encouraged and created an ecosystem for innovation amongst rural communities, right? That there is a lot of innovation there, but it's not coming out. So he's addressed that aspect of innovation itself. Whereas Professor Chakravarti in this lecture is talking about something completely different, where he is trying to talk about how research, technological research can help you bring out a great product, but not at the like along with considering how you can sort of balance that with the business aspect of it and the social aspect of it. That mm, all three have to work in sync, basically. So, my suggestion would be that you look at each week's thing, and try to take a think of what are the good takeaways for you from it. Like you can think of like in, say, suppose in one of the lectures you like their explanation of working with as a business better, and maybe a lot of the content from Professor Gupta's lecture will give you insights on what kind of innovation you should be doing or where you should be even looking for innovation. So I would suggest, like, firstly, like, you could think of it as making your own personal notes of which part of which lecture resonates most with you or answers your questions. So when you start designing a product, once you start designing a product, you automatically would have a lot of questions. So, when you actually have questions in product design, then you can look for answers from these lectures, and one of them would at least be able to answer you well, because they have gone through that process of innovation and design and creating, taking it to market many times. So that is actually the part which this course addresses, that what are the challenges you face and what should you do when you face that challenge, right?
Right.
So you can take it as a learning method, where when you're actually working with a product design, firstly, like I said, like if your product very clearly fits one category of product design better than the others, then you can kind of think that that lecture's explanation is probably going to be closest to what you require. But even otherwise, like when you are trying to create a product, design it, take it to the market, things like that, then in that process you would have multiple questions. Okay, how do I do this? Who should I approach for this? How do I ensure that it doesn't fail in this particular aspect? Then all the actually in this entire spectrum of questions you have, I think this course answers all of those questions. And
Okay.
this course kind of gives you a very 360-degree idea of all the ways in which you can actually fail, and how you can possibly avoid it, or like Professor Chakrabarti says, how you can fail fast so you can understand what the shortcomings of your product are, and you can sort of fix it in time without wasting too much money, without wasting too many resources, without wasting too much time also, because all this time when you're doing product innovation, a lot of time you're not paid. You're just doing it on your own time. So that time is also kind of a cost, right? In that kind of a setting.
True, ma'am.
So that's my suggestion, I think.
Okay. Okay. Thank you
So
so much,
I
ma'am.
don't know if you've seen all the lectures actually have transcripts also.
Yes, ma'am.
And you can, so you can just go through the transcript to look for something quickly if you're looking for something specific. And there is a book, so there is a column called books, English book, in on the
Yes, ma'am.
Swayam portal. So that
Yes,
is
ma'am.
also like, it's a compacted, they've collected the all the transcripts properly, and they've sort of put it together with the lecture slides. So if you're just quickly need to find something, you can also just find and search in the book itself. It might be helpful.
Okay. Okay, ma'am.
Okay, so I'll just continue where I was. So I was
Sure,
discussing
ma'am.
the last question in this assignment. Sorry, this is week 6. Yeah, question 6 in week 7. So here, yeah, this was the question, is an important one because he talks about the design process, and how I wanted to point out, like, how it is different from what some of the other profs have said in previous lectures. So in this part, he's actually talking about the most simple, way in which you can describe a design process. And when you implement it, what are the issues you face and how you can address it, or how they have addressed it in certain products. That is what he discusses. So the basic, the most, this question actually answers what is the most basic design process you can follow for any product design, as explained by Professor Chakraborty. He's giving the most basic design process, which everybody would need to use. So first is identification of a problem, which is of course the most important part of design. If you don't know what is the problem, you can't really solve it. So identification of problem is always, like almost always, the first step, where you need to identify the problem. So here, of course, we've not drilled it down into a lot of details. Some of the lectures do kind of break it down. Like in the previous week lecture, we broke this part down into a lot of detail into what should go into the problem statement. Here we've not done that, but of course, identification of problem means, like, of course, whose problem is it? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And he does say that there is almost always a timeline associated with it. So what kind of a timeline are you looking at for sort of solving that problem? So, but B is of course resolving the problem, which is, so A is correct. B is resolving the problem, which is the most obvious part of design. That's what we want to do in a design. We're trying to resolve the problem, but that part is not sort of like an end in itself. It leads to the next part, which is C is modification and evaluation. Like when you prototype, you create one design and then you test it and you see if it works or how much it works, because some things may work and some things may not work. And then you go back to the design table and you kind of modify it, and then you again evaluate it and you see if it is resolved, if the issue you were trying to fix was resolved. But also, like he mentions, in that process of resolving one issue, you have to always check, have you created another issue in that process? Because sometimes that happens, like maybe you reduce the number of parts in a machine, so the weight has come down, but now it's not clamping properly, or now it has reduced the number of the degrees of freedom perhaps, or you have maintained the degrees of freedom, but now there is somehow too many moving parts, so the robustness has gotten compromised, or there is too much friction in repeatedly using it, so it may cause too much wear and tear, or it may create a situation where things might break very quickly. So there's always like a balancing act you have to do in this modification and evaluation process. And like it's a very simplistic thing to say that it's modification and evaluation, but we're just trying to capture in very simple terms what the design process should be. So modification and evaluation is like you know just a very quick summary of a very big process, because you may be prototyping and testing and prototyping and testing like 10, 15, 20, any number of times, right? So modification and evaluation is, although it's like just a very brief thing mentioned here, it's a it's an entire process on its own, and it takes up, like, almost a very big chunk, a majority of the time in your design process itself. So now D, E, F, they're actually all, if you see, they're all actually subsets of the first three. So I added these because they're kind of like similar to, some of the stuff which has been covered in the previous lectures. And that's kind of why I created this question where, all this rapid prototyping and innovation on materials and all this stuff, there's nothing wrong with it, but they're already kind of covered in the parts A, B, and C, right? Where you are identifying the problem, you're already going to be observing the user when you're trying to identify the problem. When you're trying to resolve the problem and you're trying to do modification and evaluation, you will already innovate on using the best materials and processes, and you will need to do rapid prototyping. So you see, it's kind of like already included in what we already said, A, B, and C. The last part is satisfactory result. Now, this may seem like a very obvious, self-evident type of thing, but it's there because what we need to decide what we mean by satisfactory, right? For example, like I was just saying that you have timelines, you have deadlines. For example, there is a certain product which you have to release in market by a certain date. It may be like a design competition, but even if it's not a design competition, like there may be constraints or timelines imposed by the market itself or the problem setting itself. Like in the cotton picker example, like they had to innovate fast enough to be able to test different versions within the same harvest season. So you have a deadline because of that. You may have a deadline because of something else, like your funds will run out because when you're kind of doing these kind of innovation and things, you do have running costs. So you know how much money you have, and you know for how long it's going to last. So if whatever funds you have, that it's going to be over in 12 months, you need to make sure that you have actually achieved a satisfactory result within those 12 months. So that constraint considered, what is the satisfactory result? Satisfactory result, how do we decide whether it is satisfactory? So of course, when we say satisfactory, we mean that at least the demand of the end user and consumer should be met. We generally always, whenever we talk about product, whenever we talk about management, anything, we always kind of talk about the demands as in their needs versus their wants. Wants are what are like, nice to have. Needs are something which the person is absolutely sure they need. So they're going to buy something for it. It's your product or not is another question, but they do need to, that they definitely need to buy a product for it. And yes, somewhere over a period of time, wants become needs, and it's a blurred boundary. Like at some point of time, maybe mobile phones would have been a nice to have, but now it's practically a need for everybody. So it's not like it's set in stone. But at that point of time, in that setting, what is that? What is the need as per the user, not as per you? What is the user's need and what is the user's want? So satisfactory result means like it needs to be satisfactory based on whether it can satisfy the user's need and at least some of their wants. Like, if but like say you're making some new appliance or some new kind of gadget or whatever, maybe the need is that it should solve this function, or it will serve this function, and the want is it should be available in like 3 or 4 colors. I don't want like some plain Jane gray or black colored thing, right? So the want is like, I would prefer it if I could get this in blue instead of black, right? Now you should skip me a moment. So you should be able to at least address some of the wants of the user as far as it is possible, but only to the extent as far as it is possible. Because if you, for example, you cannot miss your deadline in the process of adding some nice to haves to the product, right? That doesn't work. So the correct answer is, of course, A, B, C, and G. All of the above is not true because it is kind of redundant, and this is not what is explained in that lecture, because I'm very specifically asking what Professor Chakrabarti has said in the lecture. So this kind of covers this week's practice questions. Let me just stop the share here. Now I'll just take a 5-minute break, and then I will discuss quickly the week 6 assignment, which you were supposed to submit last week, the quiz, and I'll go over the solutions of that, and I'll just see anybody. If you have any questions, you can let me know. But otherwise, I'll just go over it question by question. So I'll be back in 5 minutes, and we'll continue from there.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just share my screen for the week 6 assignment. Right. So this is based on the lecture by Professor P. Ravi from the lecture series on systemic approach to biomed innovations. So actually, a lot of these questions are directly from the lecture itself. If you see, like most of these answers, you can actually find in the lecture itself. I'll just go over them. Okay. So week 6 is the first is where he's asking about which phase of innovation is the toughest, and he's explained how we generally think that the phase of prototyping might be difficult or something like that, but he's explained like the process of generating ideas, and then just like you can generate ideas a dime a dozen, and then creating concepts is also relatively not that difficult. From prototype to the final product is the biggest challenge, because a lot of things change in that process. Like prototyping, I mean, making just one sort of prototype which is made in a different setting, in a different sometimes with different materials, and the manufacturing process is of course difficult. Sometimes you may just 3D print it, or you may just glue together some parts or things like that. But the actual final product, you need to perfect that manufacturing process itself, which is a lot harder to do, and it sometimes involves a lot of costs which you may not have considered. It may involve some difficulties or considerations which you may not have considered before. So this prototype to product is actually the most difficult part, the most difficult phase of innovation. And then he asks the question is, which among these statements describe well about Indian industry um, landscape? So the first option is Indian industries are facing tough competition from Western countries in quality aspect. So this is, he's actually mentioned it in the lecture itself. This is true that, a lot of products you see, like even in India, even though we have, enough electronics companies in India, a lot of times if you see people would want to buy electronics items from US. A lot of people actually, if somebody, some friend or relative, somebody is going to US, a lot of times they ask them that, can you buy me a laptop from there, or can you buy me something else? Whatever. And that's mainly because the quality of products in general. I mean, he's talking mostly about biomedical, but I'm saying even otherwise in general, like the quality of the products is generally a whole lot better in Western countries. And Indian industries, second option is Indian industries face tough competition from Southeast Asia and Asian countries in the pricing aspect. And that's true because many of the South Asian countries also have been innovating a lot, especially China. So all of these companies are able to produce products which, maybe at a much lower cost, maybe because they have better accessibility to labor or some other raw materials, but they are competing a lot on price. Third option is Indian industries cannot afford top-notch machinery, which is not true. Like we can, there's nowhere in the lecture do we say that we cannot afford top-notch machineries. We do have a requirement for it actually. See, there are many of these innovations and these biomedical products which are required. The doctors actually require it, and they are using machineries which actually cost a lot, right? Which are very highly priced. So it's not that we can't afford to purchase top-notch machineries, but it's that we want to innovate and build good biomedical products in India, which can be manufactured at a much lower price. And of course, if it is manufactured in India, the price would be lower even otherwise. So he's actually given a comparative thing in the lecture slides. You can go back and check it if you like, where the price of something, same kind of product in the US would be like 100 times of what that product or service may be in India. So that is the huge difference in the price gap. The last part is Indian industries are failing because of poor education. That is not true because that is, well, I don't need to explain this further. That is not true. So the third question, according to Professor B. Ravi, which of the sustainable development goals are of utmost need? Now, you remember that he's talking about in the context of innovation in biomedical products, right? Because that's his area, that's his field. So he's referring that he has explained that, because in our workflow or in our process, because he has a whole biomedical research, design innovation lab. So for them, what are the SDGs which they follow? And those are, of course, good health and well-being, innovation, and life on land. That is because these three SDGs actually cover, a big scope of what they do in biomedical product innovation. So affordable and clean energy is not one of the primary goals in their particular labs. That's the question. That's what the question is kind of addressing. Then the fourth question is, what are the 4 disciplines that we need in medical device innovation team? So if you remember in the slides, he's actually given a breakdown of each team, what it does, and who are the people that are involved in that team. Now, for this particular question, actually, the answer is fairly obvious because all the other answers are not really. You can see that you don't need an athlete or a dancer or a gym coach or a fashion designer in any of these in this team. None of these options are actually going to fit. So by default, the answer is biology expert, creative designer, electronics engineer, and mechanical engineer. But well, the question may not be framed in such an easy way in your exam. So it is important for you to know who goes in which team as per Professor Ravi's lectures. So if you have any doubts about this, I can open the slides and the part of the slides where it addresses this, but just
No, ma'am. It's okay.
okay. So just when you're studying for your exam or whatever, you can just go
Yes, ma'am.
over those slides properly where he has explained which experts go into which team, because that
Okay.
can become very confusing if you don't if you don't remember it properly, because it's not that fair, it's not that obvious, because the terminology and in what context he's saying are kind of different from say other week's lectures, so you may get confused based on what is there in other lectures. But he has given a very elaborate reasoning for why this person needs to be in this team and all that, but just make sure that you remember who goes in which team.
Yes, ma'am.
So coming to question number 5, as per Professor Ravi, why is clinical immersion important while designing a medical device? So first option is to see how the patients are doing in a clinical procedure. This is definitely going to be one of the reasons for clinical immersion, because when you're trying to design a device, you're designing it for the the health giver or the doctor or nurse, whoever, as much as you're designing it for the the patient. So if you're designing, say something like, for measuring blood glucose or some other metric, just a simple example, like the doctor of course needs the value or the reading, but it should be comfortable for the patient also to use. And if there is a clinical procedure for which you're designing some kind of a medical device, then you need to know how that clinical procedure is carried out, and what, like, is the patient anesthetized, is the patient conscious, is the patient lying down, is he standing, is he or she sitting. So all these things you need to think of when you're creating a biomedical device for a certain procedure, because basis that you're going to sort of take away your design considerations. Like if you're designing something for chap who's in the dentist chair, then you have to consider the fact that he's going to be lying down and he can't talk during that process, or he has limited, he can't move too much, or he may be in pain or whatever, right? So all those considerations need to be made a note of, and you can do that by observing patients during that clinical procedure. So the second option is to check the hospital infrastructure and file a complaint. That is not relevant for design process, because you can do that on your own time anyway if you want to. But see, when you're making a particular biomedical device, it's going to be a very rare scenario that you're designing it for only one hospital, right? That's going to be designed for a particular um, use case, not for a particular person or for a particular hospital, right? And if you design, a biomedical device, say for some diabetes patient or something like that, then the the usability of the device should be beyond just one hospital, right? It should be used for different. You can sort of decide what type of hospitals can use it, but you cannot limit it to one hospital. So like to check hospital infrastructure is of not really that kind of a help to us, and it's definitely not because you want to file complaint. The third option is to have thorough knowledge about the clinical procedure and figure out actual pain points. This is of course important because if you don't know what the procedure is, how can you design for it? Like if you're trying to design a new kind of a cast for a patient who has got a, say, a hairline fracture, you need to know what is the current process of say putting a different kind of bones in like different body parts. How do you cast them? Like if you get a fracture in your knee, it's different from what you do when you get a fracture in your shoulder, right? So you need to be clear about what is the scope of your design and what kind of a process is involved in that particular procedure. So what are the variations, what are the difficulties, what are the constraints, and what are the other devices they're using sometimes, right? Like for example, if you want to design a new type of cast with some new material or something like that, you need to know what are the challenges they face the current system, or what are the um, what are the ways in which you can improve based on some issues which the patient might be having. The doctor may not be having any issue, but like for say, suppose in the current cast, like a lot of times people complain that you feel some irritation in your skin or some itching or something and you can't do anything about it, or that it's the same cast which kind of gets dirty over a period of time, and again there's nothing you can do about it. So these are like the kind of pain points which you need to make a note of by observing and by talking to the patients and the doctor and like the other caregivers uh, for that particular condition and that process. uh, the next option is to train the doctor well in handling a medical equipment. This is of course not our purpose. We cannot train doctors, they already have their own training for the medical equipments they use. So question 5 is done. So question number 6, in reference to the lecture, what are the 3 things that a good problem definition must have, right? So this is what I was referring to, right? So in the week 7, we just say identification of problem, but in week 6, we have actually broken down the three parts of the problem definition, which which should be there in the problem statement. So if we go over the options one by one, the first is value proposition, market research, user interviews. This is not correct because we do market research and user interviews after you have decided what the problem is. So you have to first decide what is the problem statement, and then you will do market research for that particular thing, and you will do user interviews. You could do user interviews actually before defining the problem, but at least market research you're going to do only after defining the problem. So this is going to be wrong for that reason. Value proposition might be okay. The second is when, which is the timeline, how, problem definition, and why not possibility. So this is not true because the when is not technically a part of the problem definition, right? It's a constraint you are working with, but the problem definition itself does not involve a when. And the possibilities are something you're going to discuss again after you have defined the problem statement. It's not a part of the problem statement. Third option is what, which is the desired outcome, why, clinical need, and who, which is the target audience. This is the correct option because it tells you what is the outcome you want to have. Like, if I want to design a new cast for, say, fractures or something like that, then desired outcome I want to have is that it should be a cast which is more comfortable, which is, cheaper and more easy, much faster process than the current cast. That is the desired outcome. Why? What is the clinical need for it? I mean, there can be many. I can't really continue with the cast example because I don't have a medical background, so I can't explain it. But there could be some clinical needs based on the inputs you have already got from the doctors or the patients. So like some cases, the doctor will give you a very specific idea of what kind of a device he or she needs, or the patient will tell you a very specific thing about why the current device is not a good fit for them or it is uncomfortable for them. So then of course who becomes very clear there, and it has to be clear there that you're designing for what kind of patient, so what kind of person and what kind of doctors. So again, who will include both usually the patient and the doctor, since this is a biomedical device, but it could also include the person like a nurse or some other caregiver who's say, sort of administering something to the patient, or who's kind of taking readings from a medical device or something like that. So who will include the people who are involved with that biomedical device. The fourth option is project timeline, cost cutting, renovation ideas. All this is not a part of the problem statement. This is just a part of the rest of the design process. How much more is left? Okay. Question 7, why is a doctor's commitment necessary in medical devices? So I'll just directly go to each option. So doctors are not necessarily sponsoring a project. Sponsors could be anybody, so that's not relevant. The feedbacks are variable. That is definitely true because without the inputs of the doctor who's going to use the device, you cannot design the device. You don't know much about the requirement or the condition at all if you don't have inputs of the doctors. Third, they may file a lawsuit against the project. That's again not true because that doesn't apply to all the cases. That doesn't apply. Fourth is medical expert involvement ensures correct progression towards a solution. This is definitely true because as you're making the design, only a doctor can tell you whether it is solving his need or not. You can only think about trying to solve it, but only when he or she tests your prototype in the given situation, or at least checks the low fidelity prototype, only he or she can tell you whether it is actually serving the need it should be serving or not. Question 8, as per Professor B. Ravi, which funnel one has to go through to innovate a medical device? Okay, so this you can just, it's pretty kind of straightforward in this particular question because all these IA Code Fest, all these are not a part of the, innovation process as such. So the first option is the correct one, and you can just also read it directly from the slide itself. Question number 9. Which of these sentences best explain the meaning of remote osculation? So this is an example he took for a product which I think one of the students had innovated, right? That they wanted to hear the heartbeat of a patient and record it and send it to other experts for consultation, especially like in with this, and it had a special use in say remote areas where there are limited facilities for healthcare in that area, and taking the patient to some other place is a very huge hassle, and it's a cost, and it kind of you may not even have enough time to do that. So they wanted to be able to quickly record a patient's heartbeat and send it to other cardiology experts to kind of decide whether that murmur or that that what do you call that, that difference in heartbeat is if it is okay or if it's not okay. So that is the answer: hearing sound of a patient's heartbeat who's not in front of the doctor. That is remote osculation. The other options are not correct. I won't go into why they're not correct because it's kind of self-evident. Which competition did Smart Stethoscope win initially? So again, this is just directly from the slides. You can just see which one it is. It is the Medic one. And this is like just a factual thing, not a very conceptual thing. So this covers the week 6 assignment. I think we're kind of done for today's class. In the next week, I will discuss week 7's assignment, the assignment you have in Swayam portal, because I think the submission date would be over by then. And we can discuss the course content and practice questions for week 8. Okay. So I'll end the class here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Thank you, ma'am.
great. Thank you for joining.